Hi everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank the organizing committee for giving me the opportunity to present some of my work with you today. My name is Álvaro Mendes. I'm a psychosocial researcher coming from the University of Porto in Portugal. My interests are processes of communication about genetic risks within families. I also integrate, as a clinical psychologist, a pre-symptomatic testing protocol at CGPP, the Center for Predictive and Preventive Genetics at the University of Porto, which is our outpatients clinic. Today, in my talk, I will talk about the decisions made by people coming from MJD families living in a high prevalence region in Portugal, which is the Tagus River Valley region. Decisions about pre-symptomatic testing and about reproductive risks. I will draw on empirical qualitative data which are part of a broader study aiming to explore the communicational aspects of that happened within families with a set of late onset neurological conditions, of course, including MJD. Sorry. Okay. So first, a little bit of background. Decisions to undergo pre-symptomatic testing for MJD commonly involves great psychosocial complexity because it provides information without leading to any direct clinical benefit. The lack of an effective medical intervention is one of the main reasons for the low uptake rates for testing. Another potential factor for this might be the people's wish and right not to know their genetic risks and their genetic status, of course, and not to be reminded of their risks too often. Sorry. Decisions about reproduction commonly entail considerations about whether or not to have at-risk children and about engagement with prenatal diagnosis and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. This involves weighing the risk of passing on the condition to offspring alongside responsibilities to self and others, including, in this case, those not yet born. Against this background, dominant social discourses about health risks suggest that individuals with known genetic risks could be considered to have a responsibility towards the management or control of those risks, including reproductive ones. I will come back to this later because I use the concept of genetic responsibility to illuminate the participants' perspectives, particularly their negotiation between the awareness of genetic risks and their sense of responsibility towards themselves and towards others as well. As you know, Portugal has historically well-known geographical clusters of affected families. The Tagus Valley region has the highest rates in mainland in the central area. Oh, I'm sorry. That is not well formatted. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry for that. But the region is there in the central mainland of the country, where predominates the Machado lineage, which has a later onset and generally a more benign course of the disease. In the late 90s, a multidisciplinary team went to this region to apply a community-based testing protocol. They also studied the beliefs associated to the disease, most notably the social representation of MJD included a metaphor about heavy drinking. Knowledge about the diagnosis produced relief and hope because it provided evidence that affected individuals were not drunkards. And thus, of course, somehow it lessened the felt and the internalized stigma. People often represented the illness as part of the aging process because MJD does not seem to assume forms as severe as in other communities, and the first symptoms tend to appear later in life. So, as for the present study, recruitment was mediated by the Portuguese Patient Association. 33 people living in the region participated, all of the participants were white European. As we can see, we've gathered the narratives of people in a quite wide range of circumstances. The interviews were mainly conducted at the participants' homes and also at the facilities of a primary health center in one of the villages. The interview schedule was semi-structured, but quite open in a way because it allowed participants to talk about the things they considered most important in the interview. But the topics revolved around the value of predictive knowledge, the motivations and engagement with testing, and experiences of talking to relatives about test results, and more broadly about genetic risks. So I used qualitative methods, and the interviews were transcribed and analyzed thematically using a psychosocial framework. I will now turn to the findings in more detail. Some data extracts, I will use some data extracts to illustrate different themes. The focus will be on the accounts made by the participants about their current or their past decisions in relation to pre-symptomatic testing and reproduction. I will first turn to the themes that address decisions in relation to pre-symptomatic testing. Participants tended to remain uninformed about their genetic status, until they started to experience symptoms. Participants accounted for this, justifying they preferred to refrain from testing because no clinical benefit was expected, and so they would want to live free from the psychological concerns posed by predictive knowledge and by an impending severe condition such as MJD. In doing so, participants anticipated that the potential worry following a positive test result would impair their capacity to focus on everyday life. Others claimed the need to be free from the emotional unrest caused by an unfavorable result to assure the caregiving for those affected in the family, as well as parenting their children. In this extract, Carlos, for example, describes the case of his wife who had not requested testing and has preferred to face the consequences of the disease only as they have arisen. In doing so, they framed this decision as an attempt to live in hope while they were a young couple. There were also considerations against deciding not to know and how it involved ambivalence and conflicting views within the family. This sometimes involved criticism and blame, particularly directed towards at-risk relatives who had opted to pursue reproduction irrespective of the risk of transmitting the disease to offspring. However, as can be seen in this extract, this stance is also challenged by other family members who exonerate them from any charge of irresponsibility in the management of their lives and their genetic risks. Issues of responsibility were thus central in the participants' accounts. I will now turn to how participants enacted their sense of personal responsibility to act upon reproductive risks and how they perceived their moral obligations towards relatives, including any future offspring. The elimination of genetic risk was perceived as responsible behavior by some participants, including opting for prenatal or pre-implantation genetic diagnosis or not having children at all. Decisions not to have children were commonly articulated by a moral responsibility for the lives of future generations. In this extract, the couple also justified their decision with the perceived limitations of PGD. Decisions about reproduction often involved ambivalence. These emerged in the accounts of those who have had their children before being aware of their or their partner's risk. Most of these participants voiced repentance and guilt. In this extract, Selina voiced her worry about her daughter's 50% risk, particularly as she is reaching the age when she might want to know her genetic status. She then mitigates that by reasoning that the typically late onset of the disease and its gradual progression may allow her daughter to live a fulfilling life, including having children before the potential illness onset. For other participants, responsibility entailed accepting risks because they prioritized values such as parenthood, family relationships, and the value of life above any question of genetic disease. Thank you. In doing so, they claim these decisions should not be judged as unethical. In this extract, Bruno explains the accidental nature of the pregnancy. This is a relevant rhetoric issue, as some families perceive choosing to have children without first establishing one's genetic status to be controversial. Her mother, Isabel, swiftly exonerates him from blame, mirroring her own situation as mother of two at-risk sons, which were both present in the interview. In doing so, she normalizes life irrespective of genetic risks and highlights the importance of family life. They also put forward their hope that science will discover a cure, which may function as a moral asset for the construction of a meaningful everyday life, as well as a means to articulate hope for the future. So to wrap up, and to respect the time, I just want to point out some question marks and some potential avenues for psychosocial-based research. I would like to suggest that these findings may prompt a needed discussion on how to best address any specific social and cultural factors of this region that may shape the making and the meaning of responsible decisions. Also, I think the MJD research community should be involved in discussions on how best to access and to document the experience of those involved in the making of these rather difficult and rather stressful decisions. We need to acknowledge the personal and the collective experiences and decisions made by MJD families and the relevance of articulating also support at the familial level. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. I am now happy to take any questions.
Just please try to speak very loudly into the mic.
Thank you. Did you have an idea of how frequent is the pre-implantation diagnosis now currently in Portugal? So how is it an option that people are really using? Because I have lost track of that.
Thanks. I don't have any reliable estimates, but from the accounts of the families and of these families specifically living in this Tagus Valley region, I would say is almost absent in their decisional framework. I would say at the national level, There might be some individuals who have either actively considered it or even used it. But I would like to suggest that, that at least in Portugal, that is hugely dependent on the financial and on the economical possibilities of the individuals, for one hand, and for another, on another hand, for the perceptions of accessibility in terms of access to healthcare, and in this case, to specialized healthcare, to go on with PJD.
Can I add something on that? The problem is exactly what you said. I'm talking about the Azores experience that we have.
Okay.
The problem is that it's very expensive.
Of course.
Either you have a lot of money and you do it, or if you go to the health system, you have a waiting list, and this is a waiting list with a huge waiting
Up to 2 years.
for everybody. And particularly in this case where people sometimes just take this kind of decision when they reach a certain age and they want to do it, they don't have that much time.
And they want to do it quickly.
The technical possibility exists, but I don't think it's really something feasible. It's not really useful.
Absolutely. And I just want to have people are, at least the people I interviewed, they were, in a way, surprisingly, they were informed about PGD and about the potential consequences it entailed to go through that process. And so, one of the extracts illuminated that. They also integrate the perceived limitations of the process in terms of the impact on the physical health of the woman, for example, to weigh their decision making. So I think it's interesting to point out that. You have a question there? Back there.
Is it okay?
Thank you. You raised the point about therapies being available and how that may change attitude. So if you take another polyglutamine disease, like Huntington's disease,
Yeah.
there are clinical trials. And the anecdotal evidence is that there is more genetic testing other people are aware. Do you know if that kind of thought process may start impacting, the cohorts and how people may become, may start thinking about therapies and being available in clinical trials going forward?
Thank you. I think it has a potential impact, yes. I work in a context of a pre-symptomatic testing protocol, so people who are healthy. I can give an example of another high prevalent neurological condition in Portugal, transthyretin amyloidosis, for which 5 or 6 years ago it was introduced in the market a drug, tafamidis, which is not curative, but it slowed down the progression of symptoms, and the immediate effect in terms of the uptake rates of the pre-symptomatic testing was enormous. We are talking about people in their 18s to in their 20s coming, massively for testing, frequently without much considerations and active thought regarding the potential implications of taking such a test. So to wrap up, I would say, at least in my field, that is an immediate potential implication. So we need to prepare the workforce working in genetic testing programs and in genetic counseling to adequately inform them, and perhaps most importantly, to counsel them for in their decisions.
Thank you.